I'm Nick Davis, and I'm hanging out with Zero Hanger. We were probably a quarter away from, being a Collingwood Premiership player and playing out my career there. Saw Hutto the other day, and we're trying to work out, did he make me famous, or did I make him famous, or do we both make each other famous? And so for people out there that just thought it was one quarter, I actually played a pretty good game overall. My off seasons were never really that great.
Hey mates, today we are hanging out with former Collingwood player and Sydney Premiership player Nick Davis. You know who he is. We have a good chat about what it's like growing up in Sydney, coming to Collingwood as a father-son, and of course that famous 4-goal blitz to win the semi-final in 2005. But before we get into it, this episode of Hanging Out is brought to you by Providoor. Gourmet dinners by celebrity chefs delivered ready to heat and eat in minutes. Providoor uses the best ingredients and Michelin cooking techniques with every meal, a winning recipe for delivering quality at-home dining to your doorstep. Now, with all that being said, subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. We have plenty of great footy content coming out around finals and, of course, the draft and the trade period. But for now, let's hang out with Nick Davis. Alrighty, so 168 games, 235 goals, four of those probably the most memorable goals of all time. The one thing I want to do is just absolutely scream your name, Nick Davis. How are you, mate?
I'm good. How you doing? Yeah, four goals, and probably one that everyone remembers, and probably, as you alluded to, thanks to Anthony Hudson for nailing the call. It's something I've heard for just over 20 years. The 20-year anniversary was last weekend, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. How many times a day do you reckon you get people just, or like a week, just coming up to you and screaming your name in your face like that?
Yeah, a bit. No, it does happen a bit. It was obviously something that, I don't know, it's probably grown more now than and when it actually happened, it was just sort of a quarter of footy, and then we played a prelim, then we won a grand final, and sort of everything sort of happened around that. But as I said, 20 years later, and thanks to sort of social media and guys like you guys and YouTube, and as I said, and Hutto's sort of iconic call, it's kept it relevant, and it's going to hopefully it'll stay relevant until someone else can do it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be top, mate. I'll be honest, but so we'll start at the start. We're definitely going to be talking about that goal at some point. But one thing I like to sort of just to get the juices flowing, I like to ask people what their morning routine is. So what does Nick Davis do when he wakes up in the morning at the moment?
Morning at the moment is generally try and wake up my 16-year-old daughter and get her ready for school. That's the number one. That's the number one thing at the moment is it's a battle between her and I who can get up and get ready and get off to school. So yeah, at the end of the season, it's definitely dad duties take over.
Love it. So going to your playing career, you had about a decade in the AFL system, 15 years as coach. So what exactly are you doing at the moment outside of Clubland?
Yeah, outside of Clubland, I do a little bit of cross-code stuff. I do a little bit with the Sydney Roosters in the NRL. I do some work with the Waratahs women's team in the Super Rugby, and also with the men's and women's sevens, all based around the Swans facility in Moore Park. So it was a good idea to be able to do that, and the Swans have been awesome, being allowing me while I was working at the Swans to sort of cross code and do some PD in some of the other codes, learn some skills, learn some training techniques, and also learn off other athletes and coaches. So I've been really lucky where it was sort of based. My 15 years of coaching at the Swans was I was able to sort of leverage out and work in a few other codes as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually it's quite interesting because we don't have too many like pure crossover people. So as I cover NRL and AFL, I've got a little New South Wales Blues. I don't know if you can see that, a little Blues scarf there.
That's cool.
But going back to just your playing career, so you were a father-son. I don't think a lot of people know that. So to give you some context, I was born in 93. I came online and started really getting into footy probably around 2000, which is around where you debuted. I think you debuted 99, was it?
Yeah, round one in 99.
Yeah, right at the end of Tony Shaw as Collingwood coach. So, and you were a father-son recruit, and you came from a pretty good class. You had some pretty good class of father-sons in your draft year, yeah.
Yeah, we did. It was probably something. Look, growing up in Sydney, sort of regressing, that sort of has helped the crossover in codes as well. Because born in Melbourne, Dad was still playing for Collingwood. We moved to Sydney in 1985, so I was 5 years old, and grew up in Sydney when like the Swans weren't obviously as big. Through the 80s or super successful. Grow up sort of playing soccer, playing rugby league, following rugby league. Grew up in Cronulla, so I was a big Cronulla Sharks fan. ET was, he was the main man in the Shire, and I probably didn't sort of start my sort of AFL career until I was about 15 or 16, and quickly made a couple of representative sides in Sydney and New South Wales, and sort of some of my teammates in that was sort of Lenny Hayes, Mark McVeigh. We all sort of came through in the same group, which was pretty cool. Craig Bolton was in that as well, who ended up linking back up with at the Swans. And it's sort of 15 or 16, and sort of made the New South Wales teams, and then sort of Collingwood sort of come and spoke to me about potential father-son, which was for someone that was sort of anxious about going into a draft and sort of be the unknown of where you could end up. It was sort of reassuring at sort of 16 years of age that you could sort of plan out the next couple of years of your life and go to Collingwood, and look, to be able to have a pretty much a guarantee to go to one of the biggest clubs in Australia, even though sort of back end of the 90s the success wasn't there, but to be able to go to Collingwood and sort of play where Dad played and start off at Collingwood, it was something that that I was sort of really excited for. And probably a little side note, I think Dad was 7, maybe 8 games off me qualifying for Carlton as well under the father-son rule. So that could have
Yeah,
been
right.
it could have been a whole different story.
Yeah, I think you made the right call in going to Collingwood, to be honest. But so how much? Because you're growing up in New South Wales, right? So, but as a father-son, how much pressure did you feel then? Because you're being in Sydney, you're a bit removed from the Victorian AFL bubble and Collingwood bubble. So when you went over to the Pies, did you feel that pressure, or was it sort of you're sort of just coming of age and everything's new, so it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's sort of um, at 16 when you sort of, and it probably wasn't too, people up in Sydney didn't really know too much about the father-son rule, or if I was playing junior footy up here, might not have known that I was, pretty much signed to go to Collingwood. And so I wasn't really pressured into that. And it was probably more in the school holidays when I would go down to Melbourne and do some training, that I was in the paper and this is the next kid that's coming through. And yeah, it was probably a really good grounding for someone. It wasn't sort of get drafted, move to Melbourne or move to wherever the next day as a normal draftee. I was like I said, I was sort of able to start to build into it. I'd sort of go down in the school holidays and train. So I sort of knew the players. I think I played 7 or 8 games in the VFL in '98. So the year before I got drafted.
Yeah.
So sort of knew, sort of had a fair grounding in it, and then was able to sort of come back and then pack all my stuff up and go down. So in terms of a transition into the AFL and into a big club, it probably helped me to be able to be ready to debut in round 1 in '99, which I did.
It's crazy to think about though. Like you're starting really your footy journey then at 16, and I believe you also like now it's come a little bit full circle. Is your daughter in the Swans Academy at the moment?
Yeah, Jordan's in the Swans Academy, so yeah, so she's 16, so she's going along, okay. There's some similar traits, good and bad there, so which is
What are the good and what are the bad?
Goal kicking is the good, training bad.
Well, sorry, apologies. Just on that, so there's a lot of talk now. So I imagine you're pretty, you keep up with what's going on in the game a lot. So there is now talk about reducing the impact of father sons because it, and father daughters, I guess, is because it's impacting the draft too much. What's your take on that? Do you think, like, I love the father son rule. There's a lot of romance involved in it, but do you think it sort of compromises the draft, or where do you sit on that talking point?
No, and this is obviously a long time removed from being a father son pick, but I think tradition is something that that is important in every game, and I feel like in terms of a father son rule or an academy rule, which I've also been sort of heavily around it with my work at the Swans Academy. I don't. Look, I understand that some teams might think that it's a competitive advantage, but there's lots of reasons why teams are successful. There's lots of reasons why you do or don't win games or do or don't win premierships, and I don't think a father-son draft pick is that. I think there's lots of other ways of equalisations. There's lots of every team's got the opportunity to draft a certain amount of players. So look, one or two players here or there. I think I agree with the romance of it. I agree with the tradition of it. And look, I think it's look, there's plenty of other reasons why teams are winning or losing other than father-son picks. So I think it should stay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's fast forward a little bit. So you were a big part of that three-peat, unfortunately on the wrong side of it, at the hand of the Brisbane Lions. We might be on the cusp of another three-peat from the Lions, seeing as how good they're going at the moment. What were your memories like playing in those games in those grand finals against the Lions and that Lions team, because there are some unreal names in that list?
Yeah, they were the best team going around at that stage, and in terms of a list and an age demographic, what the Lions had and what the Collingwood team had that we had sort of started to build from 2000 when Mick took over. Was a group of young kids. It was sort of myself was there, Chris Tarrant, Alan Didak, Heath Scotland, Tarkin Lockyer, and then you sort of Josh Fraser, Jav Cloak, some really good high draft picks, and then Bucks was obviously the best player that I've ever played with, and the best player in the comp, Scotty Burns, and then we were able to bring in Glenn Freeborn, Carl Steinfurt, Steve McKee, and it was sort of and Anthony Rocker was still there, so we sort of had Mal Michael, like we had Shane Wakeland. We'd sort of built a really good team we had a really good mix of young draftees, role players and good players that were traded in, and then the good core Collingwood players, and we sort of had like a really good mix, and as we sort of got on a bit of a roll in the back end of 2001 and then took it through to 2002, that just probably the youthful exuberance took over, and the Collingwood Army got behind us in the back end of the year, and probably we told us that we were better than what we actually were, and we just believed it, and then we ended up going out and doing it, and we sort of knew that Brisbane side was they were the benchmark, and I think we beat them in the home and away season pretty well, and we sort of knew that they had the experience, but we had the youth, and we were like, oh, we had nothing to lose. It was a free shot, and we ended up in prelim going over and beating Port Adelaide. I think we finished fourth, and we beat Port Adelaide, so we went straight to a prelim. Played Adelaide in a prelim at the MCG. I think there was 92,000 people, and 90,000 people were Collingwood supporters, and but we ended up pulling away from Adelaide that day, and we were pretty confident that if any side matched up against the Lions, or it probably didn't match up, it was probably our diversity against that Lions side, that they were so experienced and hard and tough, and we were young and flashy and cocky and confident, and it was probably the opposite attracting, that we didn't match up with them that well, that it was either them or us. And look, it was such a big week, and I've sort of had my own stuff going on in the back end of that year with some contract stuff, and
Mm.
it was such like the more we won, the harder it was to not sign. And look, yeah, we obviously didn't win that 2002 grand final, and probably the the emotion that I felt after that game was knowing that now I had to make a really hard choice. If we had a not made the finals, or if we had have not got too far into the final series, I probably would have been an easier choice to leave. But the fact that we nearly we made the grand final and nearly won. If we hadn't have won, I probably would have stayed. So it's that was probably the feelings that I had in the back end. Not only that the team lost and the fans lost, that it was like, oh my lord, I've got to make this this choice and see what happens.
Yeah. So what was did it come down to if you won, you would have just stayed, or was it, contracts? Because like at this point in your career, you're what are you, 5 or about 4 or 5 years in?
Yeah.
Did it come down to like a contract decision and, money, or was it more that you wanted to build something, a fresh start?
It was like the Collingwood were really good, and the Swans were as well. And they were like, listen, we're not going to pay over and above. If you want to come back to Sydney, we'll try and make it happen. But and Collingwood were really good. I think at that stage it was maybe a 3 or a 4 year deal, and in sort of 2022 that was fairly long. And at Collingwood, and it was just more the opportunity to come. Look, I didn't think that the Swans in 2005 would win a premiership and make finals and be the club that we were. It was just to come back to Sydney, and there's some personal things that I wanted to come back to Sydney. And look, if Collingwood ended up not doing the trade and I would have gone back and signed that contract, who knows what would have happened. But yeah, it was a bit of a sliding doors moment, and we were probably a quarter away from being a Collingwood Premiership player and playing out my career there. So it's things can change pretty rapidly in the AFL landscape. But it was definitely not the fact that I thought that the Swans were going to be a better club or win more premierships or anything like that. Or it was nothing against anyone at Collingwood. It was a geographical thing that I sort of wanted to be back in Sydney, and ended up happening.
Yeah. That's fair. So then let's talk about the Swans. Well, and then obviously, like all anybody I assume wants to talk about with you is that 2005 semi-final, and we're in the privileged position that we are. It is sort of a weird celebration that we're 20 years on from that. And I can remember. So I feel like, do you get, when people come up to you, do they tell you like where they were and like, because it's like one of those things where you're just like, oh yeah, I remember where I was when I saw that?
Yeah, totally. It's been one of the best parts of the actual the actual goals was obviously the night doing it, and as I said, got us into a prelim, which then got us into a grand final and a premiership. And it's sort of been the stories now that 20 years down the track, whenever it sort of gets reposted by the AFL or the Swans or me, that people, I actually, it's just sitting over here. Actually, I'll grab it for you.
Yeah,
it doesn't sort of sit that far away, but the game ball is. I sort of reposted that this year, and it had sort of over 1,000 likes and reshares, and people, it would say, "Oh, yep, I was in this part of the world," or "I was there," or "I was there with my dad, and it was the greatest thing that he ever seen before he passed away." And I've had people sort of contact me and ask could they play the commentary of it at funerals, and like some stuff that and as I said, when you're doing it and you're playing footy for yourself and your teammates and the fans, and you understand that, but it's sort of 20 years down the track that people will still come up and talk to you about it, and be keen to give their part of the story, which is cool. I think there was 42,000 or something people there. I've met maybe 38,000 of people that were there. A few people that weren't there that said they were there, but look, that, in a career, if you can, I was lucky enough to I play 10 years and to win a premiership and to have a moment like that, that not only I don't forget, that a lot of people don't forget. And it's not only that, it's people from other clubs too. It's just not a Swans thing. People from, all around the competition know it. And as I said, from Hutto's commentary, and saw Hutto the other day, and we're trying to work out, did he make me famous, or did I make him famous, or do we both make each other famous? And no, it was something that, as I said, will live with me for forever.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you where I was when I was there, because I remember. So I'm a D supporter, and then my late father was actually a Geelong supporter. And I remember very vividly being on the couch, just watching that with him, and just like both hands on our heads. But I think it is because it is one of those football moments that I think has stood the test of time. It's a real cultural moment. There's only a few of them, I think, that have, 20 years on, everyone's still talking about it. Everyone knows the commentary. It's one of those ones where people remember where they were. And I think it's just really fun to think about, because, I think about how old I was when I saw that. And I think it is one of those things that, just kept the love for footy going. And, I could have, it could have gone anyway, but one of those, that memory is it's pretty vivid in my head. But like that game, so I want to talk about specifically that game, because I've seen a couple of interviews as well, where you've talked about it before. So what was the change that Roosy made was it at 3/4 time? He made a change in the ruck?
Yeah, so we 3/4 time, sort of our MO through that year was to, keep the ball inside of our stoppages a lot, and then, move it forward slowly and then get it to the forward line, where obviously in that game in the last quarter we needed to score 3 or 4 goals. So there was a change. Stephen King, actually, he tore his calf in the third quarter, and I think the coaching staff might have seen that. So then Roosy might have understood that, all right, we're going to get some ruck dominance. Let's start hitting the ball, a little bit further away from our stoppages. Sort of the midfielders would be on the inside, and the half forwards would normally sort of, create a ring around the outside. And that's where, I was, and Adam Snyder and Ryan O'Keefe, and 4 times it went my side, and away we went. And probably the last goal, sort of got back, and everyone got to their right spots, and Adam Snyder and we got to our spot, and it was sort of on the left side of the kick out square, left post, and it was sort of left foot Adam Snyder. And he goes, "No way, I'm not going. You go. You have to go." And I was like, "All right, I'm going." And that's probably why I sort of probably came at a bit faster pace than I normally would, because I sort of missed the jump a little bit, because we were sort of arguing who was going to go, and it could have been none of us, and it could have ball just could have hit the ground. But that's why I was, just a little bit late on it, and come through as quick as I did, because we were sort of arguing at the top of our run up who was going to block for who. And and then sort of the fumble, and probably expected with 36 players in a 50-meter vicinity that I was going to get hit by someone, and didn't get hit by anyone. And through it's and watching it back as I have, it's sort of the bit from the fumble to the foot sort of takes so long, and I remember it vividly, that sort of just time just sort of stopped, and I could just see the ball just sort of going, all right, well, I'm going to stop trying to grab it. I'll just sort of leave it there, and then wait, and then throw the left at it, and then lost sight of it as I sort of got hit the ground, lost sight of it for 3 or 4 seconds, and knew I got a decent chunk of it, and knew it was headed in the right direction, but just sort of hoped that it wasn't touched, or hoped that it made it and went through. And then I sort of looked up, and I saw it, just getting through, and and then sort of pandemonium broke loose at all the boys were down there, and we sort of knew that there wasn't long, didn't know there was only 3 seconds, but the crowd, the SCG crowd, that's probably another thing that people that have come up to me that were there can, like the stands were shaking, and they made friends that they never met before, in the finals game, and then they still catch up with these people now. But probably the small anecdote that no one ever knows is that that game was meant to be at Homebush, and that the Swans, since the Olympics, had signed off on the deal that any big game or finals game would be played at Homebush. I think we played Collingwood there during the season and had 80,000, and we sort of lost that first final, came back, and I think three or four of the because the NRL started a week after, so the first four, I think, finals games in the NRL were all played in Sydney, and the West Tigers had the home game, and their home game was at Homebush. So,
Right.
luckily for me and probably the SCG historians and everyone else, that game, yeah, was meant to be at Homebush, and it got moved back to the SCG, which was our home, and yeah, and I'm sort of lucky and proud that it happened. Not all due respect to Homebush and Kathy Freeman's moments and all that sort of stuff. I didn't want to. I'm only sort of going up against probably some great cricket moments like Steve Waugh and Shane Warne and stuff like that. So I'd never eclipse Kathy Freeman at Homebush, but it's pretty high up at the SCG, which is cool.
That is so interesting. There's so much to unpack in that little bit though, but that's what I've always wondered in terms of in the moment, like what's actually going through your brain. Like, is it calculated or is it all just running off instinct? And is that something, because I've always wanted to know, because I assume every player is sort of different. And then now that you're in coaching too, is like, do you have to understand what players are going, like how they actually think through a game?
Yeah, look, we're a pretty connected group at that stage. It was sort of 3 years into the process that when Roosie took over, and we're pretty connected, and we understood each other and each other's capabilities really well, and we knew how to win games. We knew how to feature players who had the right matchup, and it sort of got to that game. And another little anecdote, and you might be able to flash it up with your graphics people. I was actually leading the disposals at 3/4 time. So so for people out there that just thought it was 1/4, I was actually played a pretty good game overall. But yeah, so we knew sort of how to feature players in our forward line. We knew sort of matchups, and yeah, and once I sort of got on a bit of a roll there in that last quarter, it was sort of Hawley and Mick and Ryan O'Keefe and Snide, Damon Buchanan. It was all right. Look, we're getting out of your way. Where do you need us? And it was sort of we played the hot hand, and that was the strength of our team at that stage. That yeah, we were pretty selfless, and we knew each other really well. We knew when someone was on fire that we could facilitate that and keep it going, and that's sort of what we did in that last quarter. And yeah, it was my turn and my time, and then in the grand final we ran the same play, and Amon kicked the goal. I drew a few defenders away, and Amon kicked the exact same goal, pretty much in the grand final to seal it for us.
I love that. So, how much? So that Swans team, that 2005 Premiership team, how much of that comes down to Paul Roos? Because as a D's fan, I absolutely love Roosie. I still listen to him on the ABC podcast daily. Like, what was his coaching philosophy like to play under someone like him?
Yeah, it was. Look, I've said Mick at Collingwood, and Mick was he was more of a general.
Yep.
He was the figurehead, and it was perfect for that group that we had. We're a young group, and with that father figure, that general, the leader that he was perfect. And then moving to Sydney, and Roosie was more of a facilitator. He would sort of, he'd sort of man manage and understand things and push and sort of poke the group in the right way, but sort of let it to us to be able to work out what we wanted to do. And it was probably the middle of 2005, and sort of only watching back, and we did a documentary, Shaking Down the Thunder, and sort of watching that back, and I probably didn't realize it then, but sort of now, that middle of 2005, like Stewie Maxfield was our leader, and he sort of retired, and we had sort of our culture and the way that we wanted to do things, and it sort of worked for a lot of people and didn't work for a few. And when Stewie sort of retired, and took a back seat and sort of oversaw the leadership, we sort of split the leadership up, and sort of Hawley was a leader, Kirky was a leader, and Leo Barry, and they sort of it sort of shared the load a little bit, and sort of there was sort of three groups that sort of, and segregated is not the word because we were all sort of still together, but Hawley sort of took the rat bags, and that was I was sort of that group, and there was sort of that group that sort of went, and would sort of go under Hawley's leadership, but we all sort of had our North Star that Stewie and Roosie sort of wanted us to go to, but we would find our own way there, which might have been all right after a game, going out and having a few beers together, or this, that, and the other, and then sort of Kirky had his sort of crew that would, the diligent guys, the dot the I's, cross the T's, and they had their way of getting through a week and getting us to where we want. And then sort of Leo had his group, and it was sort of, looking back at it, it was sort of a blessing where it sort of wasn't sort of, one way to get there. We all sort of knew what we wanted. We had our philosophy, we had our culture, but there was three different sort of cultures in that one culture that were able to play out, and it sort of just gave you a little bit of breathing room. And no doubt, sort of the back end of 2005, we played our best footy. Me personally played my best footy at the Swans because we sort of found the right balance of, okay, I'm following Hawley, and if he tells me no, then I'll say no. Whereas if it was someone from one of the other groups, I'll like, well, they don't know what I'm actually thinking. So it was a really interesting one. And looking back over it, and I said looking back over the documentary, it sort of wasn't until that leadership got split up and then everyone found their group and their people. And I said, like, we didn't segregate, but we just sort of got in our own lanes, and then come game day, we were back together and did our thing, and then we'd go our separate ways. And I said, if Hawley said, all right, we need to pull our head in for a few weeks, we'd pull our head in. If Hawley said, all right, we're having a crack this weekend, we're having a crack. And we sort of found a really good balance and harmony in the team, that we didn't all need to be doing the same thing and singing from the same hymn book to get the ultimate outcome from each other, and for each one to play our best footy. So we found out when we needed to all be in tune, and then we all sort of found out when we needed to be separate. And it was one of the biggest things I reckon happened in 05, that once we sort of got that right, that we sort of got in such a flow state that we were obviously hard to beat.
That's so interesting. But so that's from the team perspective, but the actual, from pure football. So everybody remembers, Roosie bringing that game plan of like heavy contest and defense. And, we've heard a couple of people saying like, this is going to be the end of football because it's just stoppage after stoppage after stoppage, highly defensive. What was that like from inside the four walls at the Swans at the time?
Look, to be fair, like on Roosie, it wasn't Roosie's game plan. It was Roosie's game plan that he worked out that this team could execute, and knowing the list, and that's why he was such a great coach. He knew his people. He knew what the majority of the team could do. We had KPIs. We knew that if we kept teams under 10 goals, that we could kick 11 goals or we could kick 18 goals. And on each week, it would sort of fluctuate, but we knew our baseline was a certain amount of pressure acts, a certain amount of tackles, keep them under 10 goals, and we would win 80% of our games. And we all bought into that. And as I said, sometimes we'd win 11 goals to 10, sometimes we'd win 20 goals to 10. But we knew that as long as we kept them under 10, that was our baseline. And then whatever happened over that, and if someone got hot and Hawley might kick 6, or Mick might kick a few, or I might get on the end of a few, or whatever it was, we just knew that our baseline, if we covered our baseline, which was that keep them under 10 goals, and then we knew sort of during a game, if we got in at halftime, team would kick 6 or 7 or 8 goals, we were like, all right, we know what we need to do. We can only allow 2 more goals here, or else we put our win in jeopardy. So then we'd go really defensive, or if we'd come in at halftime and, pardon me, they were on 3 goals, we were like, oh sweet, we've got a few goals to play with here. Let's open up the floodgates. And it was a really simple way to to look and play our footy, and it got, as I said, it got everyone in tune, and we all knew what we needed to do, during a game to make sure that we gave ourselves the best chance to win.
Yeah. So yeah, so interesting. So, you mentioned before that not many people know that you were the high disposal getter at that 2005 semi-final. I think something else that goes underappreciated is in the 2006 grand final. I think you kicked 3 goals. Was that right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Sort of was out of the team in the back half of the year with some discipline stuff that was fair enough, and then got my way back. I think I played the last 2 rounds, and again, final series. I always sort of, prided myself on being a finals player, and 2006 grand final. I think kicked 1 just before halftime. Got a couple in the third quarter.
Mm.
And probably again the last quarter, it sort of was like, oh, here we go. The boys were like, "This is you again." I'm like, "All right, let's have a crack." And Goodsy kicked the first goal of the last quarter. I think put us 1 point behind within 10 seconds of the centre bounce, and we were like, "Here we go. We're going to run over the top." But probably the fact that West Coast had that, burnings from the year before of losing by 4, that we weren't able to get across. But yeah, look, back to back would have been awesome. But now, obviously, having shared some time and worked with Coxie, and running into the Eagles boys 20 years down the track, it's probably fair that we split that rivalry, 1-1 over the 3 or 4 years that we played, and we had some epic games, and people would always say, "Oh, you must hate playing against West Coast," but they were the easiest games to prepare for because you knew who you were playing, you knew your opponent, you knew what it was like last time. I knew I'd be playing on Drew Banfield or David Wirrapunder, and they were actually the easiest games to prepare for because you knew what you were going to get. You knew it was going to be a pure game of footy, and they were the games that we really look forward to.
That's so interesting to hear. Because as a neutral fan, those 2 grand finals back to back were incredible. How long did it take you to get over the fact that you had missed out on the back to back? Like, how long did it take you?
An hour. Yeah, it was like it was a little bit because there was a few guys like Teddy Richards, Nick Malcheski, Joe McVeigh. There was a few guys that had come into the side that were sort of on the periphery in 05, and they ultimately got their grand final in 2012. But yeah, look, it was probably something that back to back would have been something cool, and but we're unable to do it. And look, whether you like it or not, winning is what it ultimately comes about. And I played 10 years in the AFL, and I've got an 05 WhatsApp chat group. There's no 06, there's no 04, there's no 02, there's no 08. So it's it's something that bonds you together, that premiership.
How active is that group chat? Is it a day-to-day thing?
It's pretty active. There's a few that are normally pretty active in the group, and there's a few that are normally active, and there's a few targets that were always the targets back in the day. So it's a pretty active group, and obviously 20 years this year, and birthdays, and everyone's getting that little bit older. So it's pretty active, and it's always a pleasant reminder that some of us haven't and will never grow up.
I love that. So coming towards the end of your career, after you sort of finished up in the AFL, I don't think a lot of people know this either, that you made a play as a punter in American football.
Yeah, I spent some time at the San Diego Chargers, went over to a punting school. And from there ended up down in San Diego for a little bit, and I was the first person I actually walked into in the off season was quarterback Phil Rivers, and obviously you've got the Australian accent, and he's like, "Well, perfect. Your job is every Friday to cook the barbecue." I was like, "Yep, no worries. I have to do that." You're the new token Aussie, because Darren Bennett had obviously had a really big career, former Melbourne player at the Chargers, so there was a little Australian theme, but. Yeah, it was over there. It was sort of off the back of knee injury I had, and pardon me, and had a bit of a crack, and I was pretty close, but just sort of had Jordan, first daughter, and it was just sort of not the right time, and probably could have gone back and kept pursuing it, but it would have been pretty selfish at that time to go back and do it. So the Swans had just sort of started up their academy, and they'd reached out about a coaching position there, and sort of took the less selfish route, and sort of stayed with the family. And look, I learnt so much. It's helped my coaching. It's helped my individual kicking coaching, and given me lots of opportunities to to work around different codes in Sydney. So it's something that I'll always be grateful for. And look, now I'm a actual and Vegas Raiders fan. So the fact that if I had to play for the Chargers, it would have been a little bit weird.
But so you spoke about your sort of cross code there. So now, you're coaching as you're a kicking coach. Was it at the Waratahs as well, and then Roosters? Yeah.
Yeah. So to the Waratahs Super Rugby Women's, probably my first foray into the female coaching ranks was with the Sevens, and probably started off with one of the greatest women's sporting teams in Australian history, winning gold medals and Commonwealth Game medals. And I was probably blessed there that my first foray into women's sport was with those guys. And it sort of sparked up a passion for obviously having a daughter myself, and for women's sports. So with the Super Rugby Waratahs women, when the opportunity to do a little bit of work there was great. Obviously, back into my Swans coaching career was with the AFLW team, and it was such a great passion of mine. And then since 2018, I've been consulting there and doing some specialist stuff with the Roosters in the NRL men's, and just been super lucky to work with some of the great players in the NRL, and one of the greatest modern day coaches, probably just behind Craig Bellamy, in Trent Robertson in success. And as I said, it's been something that I've really enjoyed growing up. Probably watching more rugby league on TV than I did AFL as a kid, and knowing the game, but to be able to be a part of Collingwood Football Club, Sydney Football Club, and the Sydney Roosters, three great clubs. I've been absolutely blessed. So looking to continue that now, sort of in the NRL. Now I've sort of stepped away from AFL coaching with the Swans. As an opportunity to expand that through the NRL, or go back to the AFL. We don't know yet.
To be honest, and it's been quite a interesting year for the Roosters. Like, he's just sort of stormed into finals, and then unfortunately just bowed out this past weekend. How did you find that? Because to be honest, like at the start of the year, we do our sort of season previews for all the NRL teams, and look, we didn't have the Roosters making the 8, or we didn't have them making finals, but he's made a really big charge into the back end there.
Yeah, it was it was such a. It's one of those seasons, and sort of Robbo was sort of summing it up in the change rooms the other night, that it's one of those seasons where you don't expect it, and then when you get there, you're like, oh damn it, we actually missed a real big opportunity to do something, because look, we made such great improvement throughout the year. A lot of the Hugo Savala, the Fahu White went to another level. Spencer Lenu found his groove in the back end. Lindsay Collins, and probably Teddy had one of his best years. Obviously,
he's pretty handy.
Having that state of origin and representative stuff allowed him to be super fresh, and he was working on so much. And he's probably one of the players I work closest with his high ball catching, and just seeing the freshness of him throughout the year. And then Marky Mark comes in from rugby union and starts sitting on people's heads, and it was one of those years that. It's an analogy that people use a lot, the green shoots. There's a lot of green shoots at the Roosters. And look, it's such a well-led club, obviously from Nick all the way down through Robbo, that whether there's highest of highs, but the lowest of lows never feel that low. There's always such great stability and such great belief that that the answers are right there, and we probably answered some really good questions. That second half against Melbourne a few weeks ago was some of the best footy I've seen the lads play. And look, hopefully it sort of bounces everyone into pre-season, knowing what we just sort of left behind was such a great opportunity. But there's another opportunity in 2026, not far ahead.
if there's we don't have a lot of crossover in terms of audience, but if there's one player that I think to watch that would attract AFL players to the NRL, it is Mark Nwangani-Tawase, because he is just so fun to watch. So in terms of the differences between AFL and NRL coaching, or just training in general, what are the big differences between how you approach like just the physical side of it? Because
Yeah.
you have such endurance running in AFL, but then the amount of hits and contact that you have to do for rugby league is just is miles ahead.
Yeah, it's just totally different. You got one sport that's very anaerobic, and the AFL players as such, anaerobic athletes, where the NRL boys, they're built for power, and just the contact conditioning that they do. And John Longmire actually came and spent a week at the Roosters in the back end of the year just to sort of have a look around and see what it was like. And like his face when he came into the ruck room and saw how they sort of go about their contact conditioning that they need to do. And I was sort of explaining to Horse that it's what they need to do. They need to be conditioned for contact. Whereas if you bring Robbo or Craig Bellamy to an AFL training session midweek, he'd be astounded by how much they run. Because you just need to be running conditioned. So it's I've got great appreciation for both sports and both groups of athletes, that and what it takes to be able to be at the elite level of both games has just gone to such a high level. And it's good to be a part of it. And I've sort of been able to be out in the field or in the coach's box since 1999. So I've been, super lucky to be, part of, high level sport for so long.
So one thing that I also wanted to ask you about, and it's the reason that we've sort of been brought together today, is the Providoor Ad, and it's I mean, I love it. I've got to so one thing that I've always been fascinated by is AFL players in ads and what they do post their career. I'll be honest, you're out of all the ex-AFL players and AFL players that do a little bit of acting in ads, you nail it in this Providoor Ad. How many takes did that take?
Because there's no acting, because I actually make Jordan watch it every night, and Jordan hates watching it every night. So she is the star of it, Geordie. She and everyone's like, oh my God, Jordan was such a great actor. And like, no, like Luke, who's my mate from Providoor, he's like, no, she was actually filthy that she had to go in and film it and watch it again. So it was it's probably something that that it was a great idea from Providoor, and actually their products are very, very good. And that was probably I got onto it through their product first, and then Luke was a big Swan supporter. He's like, man, we should do this. No one's ever done an ad or a skit from those goals. And there was obviously a few things in regards to some stuff working at the Swans with some sponsors that I couldn't do it for, but now I've finished at the Swans. The doors are open, so maybe a Toyota Legends ad might be in the cards or something like that. Providoor were the first, and check it out. It's on my socials, and I reckon you guys will tag it in here somewhere. But it's actually it was quite funny. It was
Was it a full day shoot?
Yeah, no, it actually wasn't. One take. I'm pretty good. One take, couple of hours, and it was good fun actually, and it was good to have Geordie in there as well. She was as I said, she was as candid as ever and as dry as ever, and it was.
When you were playing, what was the weirdest sort of marketing thing or sponsor thing you had to do?
There was one that I was sponsored by Reebok, and I had a summer fashion shoot coming out, and that was obviously the start of preseason, and my off seasons were never really that great. And I'd sort of, could balloon out and put a bit of weight on, and Reebok and my manager through Reebok said, that they want to use you for a catalogue shoot. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it can't be that hard. Obviously, throw some clothes on, and then the day before, the details come through, and it was actual swimwear. So I was like, oh my Lord, I've got to have no shirt on. And it was with Ashley Harrison. I think he was with he might have still been at the, I don't know, but Ash was just, he played in the NRL, was just absolutely ripped. And I was like first week of preseason back, and I was never really in great shape, but I still remember the day, and I was like, oh my Lord, I can't believe I've got to go and do this shoot. And I didn't eat for the, I was like, oh, I'm going to have a crash 24-hour diet. I'm going to try and get rid of all this fluid. And so that was probably one that I wasn't looking forward to, actually.
What do you reckon my chances are of finding that so I can clip this up and put it up next to it?
I reckon I know that I've got the photo of it somewhere. So luckily it wasn't AI'd, but I do thank the people at Reebok for looking after me. Oh, that's all I'll say.
I'm sure that's made an appearance in the group chat at one point or another.
Absolutely.
Oh, mate, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for your time and chatting to us. And 20 years on from one of the greatest footy moments I think that we'll ever see. Yeah,
no worries, guys. Always happy to. I said 20 years is a long time. I've spoken about it a lot, but it's always good to be able to reminisce and hear a few more stories about it. So always pleasure to talk about it.
Beautiful. Thanks, mate.
No worries.